trade in luxury goods with North Korea is prohibited under UN sanctions. So I think these will be the ways that Russia will be exploring in cooperation with North Korea.
Jenny, some analysts are calling Russia's increased military cooperation with North Korea a threat like no other. Would you agree?
You know, I'm not sure I'd agree like no other, but it's definitely concerning. And the extent to which they may cooperate, I think, is still unknown. And it's something that we may get some clarity on from this summit itself, whether they go back to that sort of mutual defense arrangement that they had during the Soviet era, or if they still keep, you know, cooperation going, but at a more limited level. So, you know, I wouldn't overstate what their cooperation would be, or even the sustainability of it over time. But in the meantime, it does pose mutual benefits to both actors that does push them into a realm that makes it a more formidable force, especially for the North Koreans, than what we've seen in the past.
We had some problems with our live stream until now, but I'm being told that the stream is now up and running. So we're here, still waiting for your questions to come in. Ask away. In the meantime, though, I want to bring up something that NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg just said. He's on a visit to Washington, D.C., and he expressed his concern about potential support Russia might be providing to North Korea for the modernization of its nuclear program. How big of a factor is that, Jenny, in their cooperation, you think?
I think at this point, it's really hard to say. Russia has been very open about being willing to cooperate, for instance, on satellite technology. North Korea has been on a big push to develop and put in orbit military reconnaissance satellites. This technically is not sanctioned activity, but the actual satellite launch vehicles themselves would be, if there is cooperation on that end, because there are military applications to the booster technology of the rockets. Whether Russia is cooperating in other, WMD realms is unclear. There do seem to be indications that it is helping, in terms of quality control on the conventional side and the munitions factories, for instance, helping improve the quality of what's being provided to Russia. But I don't think there's any clear evidence yet that they've really, passed over into the realm of, say, for instance, sharing missile technology or nuclear weapons designs or things on that order. But it would be, obviously concerning if they did. And again, it would help North Korea move more quickly, advance its programs more quickly than what it can do on its own.
And we have our first user question there. It is one for Grzegorz. I'd say Yathartha Agrawal is asking, is Russia going to move away more and more from Europe and the West? What do you say, Grzegorz?
I mean, this is clearly the trend. This is something that the Russian president is talking openly about, that Russia now is in for a long conflict with the West, and that it has to recalibrate, it has to pivot towards Asia, and nearly in every speech we are hearing of Russian president talking about the need to create this multipolar world, that Russia needs to develop its relations with other major countries of the world. And I think he's at the same time he's reacting and creating this new reality that Russia is finding itself in.
Now, Jenny, if Moscow's alliance with Pyongyang is growing closer, this must be on China's radar. Where does that leave this big, important ally to both of those players?
Well, not in a good place. I think there's a lot of concern in Beijing about what's happening. And again, trying to understand the extent to which these two are cooperating. When it comes to, when it comes to different approaches, Russia, for instance, as has been said, it has really been working towards building an alternative world order of upending, this U.S.-led economic paradigm, world paradigm, whereas, China still wants to be a part of that, and China definitely, wants to have a leadership role within that system. And so, the actions that both Russia and North Korea are taking and on some level work against Chinese interests. And this is certainly to Beijing on how to handle this, because at the same time, I think there is still sympathy within Beijing about the actual security situation, especially for North Korea, because China is seeing the same patterns in East Asia of greater U.S. influence, greater NATO influence in East Asian affairs. Greater security cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan, and it's all very concerning in terms of the perception of encirclement for Russia, for China, and so when North Korea invokes this kind of language and this kind of security dynamic as well, it still fits within that Chinese narrative. So it makes it very difficult for them to really push back against the actions that North Korea is taking, even when it does work against its interests.
Yeah. I just want to ask our viewers to don't be shy. I want to encourage you to post your questions. They're starting to trickle in. I'm going to ask one of my own, and then I hope to have some more user questions. Kind of docking on to what Jenny just said, Grzegorz, China is very concerned by the heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula. How does Russia feel about a possible escalation between North and South Korea?
I also wouldn't say an escalation, a violent escalation is in Russia's interest. I think Russia uses these intensification of contacts with North Korea pragmatically. We've been talking about the arms deliveries, but it's also a sort of leverage. Well, first of all, we shouldn't forget that Russia has been participating in the sanctions regime against North Korea for over a decade, from 2006 to 2017. Yes, later this great power competition and now the war with Ukraine have prompted Russia to change ways, but I'm not sure if this initial assessment that North Korean nuclear program could be a threat also to Russia, I'm not sure if this assessment is totally gone. I wouldn't say so. So at the same time, working with North Korea now is a way for Russia to signal to the West, hey, we can be disruptive. We can be disruptive to this international system of governance of sanctions regime that we've been cooperating with you on, so you have to deal with us again. And on the other hand, there are also important relations with South Korea. Russia and South Korea have a degree of cooperation, and trade relations were even more important than with North Korea. And especially in this situation, Russia has a very big interest in South Korea not delivering weapons to Ukraine. South Korea is not doing that, but it has a formidable arms industry. North Korea has signed big arms supply treaties with NATO member Poland, which is also supporting Ukraine strongly. So Russia definitely doesn't want South Korea increase its support increase its cooperation with the Western camp. Even recently, Vladimir Putin has been praising Seoul's stance and position on not sending arms to Ukraine. So by cooperating with North Korea, Russia is also sending a signal to South Korea to not increase its cooperation and support for the camp which is backing Ukraine in this conflict.
And I have a question from Test Gaga 12 to both of you. They ask, are there any alternatives that can cool down the current situation? Let's start with you, Jenny.
Yes, there are ways in which we cannot react to some of the actions that are being taken these days. But it's going to take some real political leadership and a real sense of I think a real confidence, especially on the South Korean side, to not react to some of the things that North Korea is doing. As Grzegorz says, I think there has been utility in having a certain level of tension on the Korean Peninsula that does help, for instance, Russia in the war in Ukraine and in keeping the U.S. and South Korea distracted, as well as keeping the stakes high for South Korea getting further involved in the war in Ukraine. But even the back and forth between the balloons, and North Korea sending the trash balloons to South Korea. This kind of action is probably like the least provocative military action that North Korea could have taken. And for the US and South Korea to respond with B-1 bomber runs, it sort of forces, North Korea to respond in a more military manner as well. So there are actions like this where, a level of restraint is needed. Especially since we don't have open communication channels between the two Koreas right now. And there are such tense relations. I think it really takes that political leadership to create some off-ramps here in order to not push each other into a more violent escalation.
And how do you see it, Grzegorz? Is there a way to cool tensions between Russia and the West?
I think in the concerning the Korean Peninsula, I think Jenny really has described the situation very, very well, and I wouldn't have much to add. I think in the broader picture concerning the relations between Russia and the West, I think we are now in the middle of a process in which Ukraine and Russia are competing for support, for international support, for a possible solution to this conflict. We've just had this major Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland, where over 90 countries have attended. And even though Russian officials were playing this conference down, it really shouldn't be neglected that this was quite formidable success on the Ukrainian side to kind of set up the agenda for the future negotiations. And I think this is also, this trip also shows this, that Vladimir Putin is now going to North Korea. He will later travel to Vietnam. So he's trying to get support he's trying to show that there is still support from other countries for Russia. So I think, and I think that many of these countries don't really want to see a bigger escalation. And I would say that this ongoing process of trying to win over support from other countries could be a factor which could actually contribute to lowering the tensions between Russia and the West.
Mm-hmm. Questions still only slowly coming in here on the chat. So feel free to keep them coming. There is a theme that I'm seeing, people asking about the quality of military supplies coming out of North Korea. What can you tell us about that, Jenny?
Well, I think in the early days, from anecdotal evidence, it was clear that North Korea had been selling off stocks. So a lot of these, a lot of the ammunition in the early shipments were old and did not work well, did not have great performance. I think anecdotal evidence is showing now that the performance is much better, and that more than likely these are newly produced munitions that are going into Russia. North Korea has really emphasized in recent months a revival of its defense industries. We've seen Kim Jong Un, visiting munitions factories, for instance, doing quality control. Like I said, there's been rumors of, Russian technologists, Russian engineers in some of those factories as well, helping try and improve performance equality over time. So, what Russia is getting now from the North Koreans is much better than what it was getting in the early days. And we've seen even evidence of, some of the missiles, North Korean missiles that have been used on the battlefield in Ukraine are also, newly produced within the past year. So, this isn't just old stocks, and over time, the performance of this has improved.
We have one question here, Unicum, in our chat on YouTube. Will there be closer ties, as in military alliance between North Korea and Russia? Maybe we can interpret it as a formal military alliance. Do you think that is going to come out of this visit, Grzegorz?
Vladimir Putin actually has already announced that there will be a strategic partnership agreement signed. We expect this agreement to be signed tomorrow during the main day of his visit to North Korea. And this will be an upgrade to the relations. However, we don't know yet what is going to be in the treaty. It's not public yet. I think we need to remember that North Korea has been in a very close alliance with the Soviet Union for many years. Back then, their treaty on friendship even included a clause on an automatic military assistance in case one of the sides was to be invaded. So this was a very close military alliance. It was even codified in the treaties. However, later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, these ties between Russia and North Korea have cooled off, and we haven't seen this degree of cooperation. Now, with this Ukraine war ongoing, we see the revival, and accordingly, there will be apparently a new agreement on strategic partnership signed, and we will see what it includes. But ever since last year's Kim Jong Un's visit to Russia, there has been a range of delegations visiting between the two countries on many issues. As Jenny mentioned before, it's not only military cooperation. Officially, this is even put in the back of the talks, but we have economic talks on discussions on cultural ties, on tourism. So this is something we will definitely be observing tomorrow.
Jenny, Unicum also asks, if there were to be a formal military alliance, will China stay neutral if it comes to that point? Or could we see what's often being talked about as a strategic triangle between Russia, North Korea, and China?
Well, I think we have to be careful about how we use the word alliance. So, even if a treaty is signed tomorrow that upgrades the cooperation between, Russia and North Korea, it's not going to be an alliance the way that, for instance, the U.S. and South Korea is an alliance. It's not going to have like a joint command military. It's not going to have that level of integration. I think there's some concerns of, whether, again, it goes back to as Grzegorz says, the clause where there was automatic military assistance that would go back and forth in case of conflict. But even then, North Korea and China have a similar friendship treaty that includes that. And even that treaty itself, the Chinese have said in the past, if the US starts a conflict, they will definitely help. If North Korea started the conflict, they wouldn't. So, this isn't the kind of ironclad alliance that we see on the US side of the equation. But it would be, a partnership. It would be, greater cooperation than what we've seen in the past. It would upgrade what we've seen, since the Soviet Union, since the fall of the Soviet Union. How China reacts to that, there's not going to be a trilateral military alliance between these countries. Like I said, they have, China and Russia have very different interests and a very different worldview at the moment, even though they do have some mutual understanding of the threats in the world around them and the role that the US plays in that.
Yeah. Maybe docking on to that, Sonu Thomas is asking if it's possible that China is sending lethal aid to Russia through North Korea to avoid sanctions. Jenny, maybe if you want to have a go.
Yeah, I don't think so. China doesn't have to do that. Certainly, the military aid that there has been evidence that China is, providing Russia with military assistance. They're doing it quietly, but they're not doing it through a third party, and you don't need North Korea to do that.
Mm-hmm. And another one coming in for you, Jenny. Maus, the German, asks, do you think it's in Kim's interest to have more North Korean workers in Russia? Could that be part of the talks?
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the points, even that the Russians in the past, when the sanctions were passed, that they had been trying to carve out space for, is to keep some, North Korean workers in the country. This is a big economic boon to the North Koreans to have, that foreign currency flow coming in. And, it's one of the first things that we've been hearing signs of in terms of a resumption of trade and economic activity is trying to get more and more North Korean workers into Russia in like construction industries and logging and other kinds of agricultural work in order to bring in greater economic flows to the country.
Mm-hmm. And Jenny, you're usually based in the US. You're in Seoul right now, but we have a question about America's stand on this. Has there been any official statement?
So I'm actually in DC now. I was in Seoul last week.
Sorry, we got that wrong then.
It's okay. It's okay. But yeah, the US is very concerned, as is South Korea, about the developments, about the persistence of this relationship and the deepening of this relationship. They're very concerned about sanctions, violations being made, and the implications that it has for the weapons programs. It condemns, this continuing partnership, and has been very clear and consistent about that.
Mm-hmm. Grzegorz, Vladimir Putin said Moscow and Pyongyang would resolutely oppose what he described as Western ambitions to hinder the establishment of a multipolar world order. That sounds like a threat. What does he mean exactly?
I mean, this is something that we've been actually hearing from Vladimir Putin very often, and this is... well, whether this is a threat or not, I think it's up to interpretation. But Vladimir Putin is even now during this. Right before this trip, he said that Russia is interested to develop alternative trade and mutual settlements mechanisms, which wouldn't be controlled by the West, which would allow Russia and North Korea to trade and interact more closely despite the sanctions. And the importance of this point for Russia comes out of necessity. The sanctions on Russia are significant. They've just been strengthened last week by the US. So Russia is investing a lot in these alternative formats and mechanisms that would allow it to bypass the sanctions. Russia is investing a lot politically in the BRICS format, where it cooperates with other major economies. It also invests a lot politically in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So this is part of this overall picture of the overall activities of Vladimir Putin since the start of this war, or even before. And as I said, this trip comes in a week right after this big Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland, so where many countries came together to discuss the possible solutions to the conflict, and where Russia was not invited, and now it is. From Vladimir Putin's perspective, it's time to also go out there and show that he is still able to travel despite the arrest warrant that was issued for him by the International Criminal Court, and that he still has allies in the world, and he is going to be showing just that in North Korea and in Vietnam, where he goes later to.
Yeah. Jenny, where does North Korea see itself in that multipolar world that they're envisioning?
I think they're feeling pretty good about it. I think one of the reasons why North Korea has said that Russia is its #1 priority these days is I do think they admire and appreciate. I think they see Russia as sort of the leader of this movement to create this multipolar world, and I think they see Russia making progress on it. In the early aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think there was pretty widespread condemnation of those actions. And Russia had very few supporters. One was, of course, North Korea. But we've seen Russia regain ground. And last year, 2 years into the war effort, there was 5 new countries that joined BRICS. Really is a testament to the idea that this idea is making progress. And so North Korea is one of the first countries to really embrace the idea of a new Cold War emerging as far back as 2021. And really sees the benefits of having that kind of division in the world, because on the autocratic side of that and the undemocratic side of that, there's room for it to maneuver, where there's more countries that would be willing to, for instance, trade with them regardless of sanctions. There's more political value to their support on that other side of the equation, and so the larger that bloc grows, and the more Russia is really sort of leading that movement, I think the more North Korea sees opportunity in that arrangement.
Yeah. Before we get back to user questions, I want to kind of lead over to Grzegorz. What allies does Russia have left at this point besides North Korea?
Yeah, I think this picture of Russia's allies is a very nuanced one. I mean, there are countries which support it outright and with full force, as we see in the example of North Korea. But there are very few countries that really support it militarily during this conflict. So we have North Korea that is supporting Russia with weapons. We also have Iran that is supporting Russia mostly with drones. And we also have Belarus, which allows Russia to conduct military operations from its territory. We don't know anything about Russian arms deliveries, but Belarus has allowed Russia to stage attacks from its territory in the first phase of the war. And there are also many countries which are leaning towards Russia politically, but that are not ready to bear the brunt of the sanctions that come with it. And these are some major economies like that are working with Russia, but they don't want to cross this threshold of an outright military support in this conflict. So we have China, for example, that we know is supporting Russia with technology, stepping up exports to Russia, but it has this policy of not providing weapons, even though there is a lot of these items have a dual use and could be used as well as it could be used for industrial as well as for military purposes. So there are also countries where Russia traditionally has a lot of influence politically and militarily: Syria, Mali, Cuba. But these, as I said in the beginning, these countries that provide an outright military support, there is not many of them, and that's why this trip to North Korea is so valuable for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, we have about 4.5 minutes left. So if you have a question for us, now is the time to post it in the chat. In the meantime, we have one from Mouse the German. Again, he has another question. Isn't it actually, Jenny, in China's interest that Russia helps strengthen North Korea's regime? North Korea is an important buffer zone to South Korea, he says.
You know, I think China is generally supportive of making sure North Korea is stable. You know, China really prizes and prioritizes stability above all else. But, you know, at the same time, China is not in favor of North Korea's, you know, WMD ambitions. They've been very consistent also in calling for denuclearization, getting back to talks. Again, unlike the Russians, who have generally accepted the idea that North Korea's nuclear program is here to stay. So, you know, there's a difference between, you know, supporting stability of the regime and stability of North Korea and stability on its borders versus actually trying to strengthen the regime and strengthen North Korea's military and WMD capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Thomas Geyer, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope so. He's asking, is there a decision by the U.S. and their allies to interrupt shipments of weapons by rail from North Korea to Russia? Anything you might be aware of, Jenny?
You know, I think it would be difficult for them to actually do that because, again, all of this is being done in Russian territory and Russian rail. So unless there's, you know, some actual disruptions in country or, you know, destruction of the railroads themselves, I think it would be very difficult to do. And as far as I know, that decision has not been made.
We are getting ready to wrap up here. We have one more question from TestGaga12, maybe to both of you. Let's start with you, Grzegorz. How will this end up? Do you think this partnership has a future, and where could it be going?
I think this partnership is very valuable to both countries, to both sides in this specific moment. And this visit is a testament to that. Vladimir Putin is arriving to North Korea for the first time in 24 years. He's been there only once so far, back in 2000. So I recall Mr. Putin's speaker saying yesterday that the relations with North Korea are improving, are on the, as he called it, in an upward trend. And I think this is a good description, because we, as Jenny has also pointed out, there are very important limits to this partnership. But I think the parties will be just exploring what is possible and just using the possibilities.
Yeah, Jenny, very little time. Where do you see this going?
I would generally agree with most of what Grzegorz said. I would just say that, you know, I think the sustainability of this over time will be how long they see mutual benefit. And so if Russia is moving towards, is gaining success in building a multipolar system and North Korea benefits from that, this relationship will continue. So until that starts to reverse trend, I think the relationship will they'll continue to explore how to deepen and strengthen this relationship.
And unfortunately, that is our time. Thank you so much, Jenny Town and Grzegorz Szymanowski, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences. Of course, also to our viewers, especially those who sent in their questions. Thank you so much for participating and for making Ask DW a platform for dialogue and understanding. We hope it was as interesting for you as it was for us. I'm Nicole Fröhlich. Thank you so much for your company. Bye-bye.